Before we jump into this video, the topic for today is arachnophobia, which I know can be a really unsettling and potentially triggering topic for people who have arachnophobia. I want to reassure you that while there will be Monster Hunter Wilds footage, no spider enemies will be shown in the footage. I will be showing the arachnophobia mode censoring enemies into slimes, but there will be no realistic or simulated or cartoony depictions of spiders at all in this video. I will, however, be talking very briefly about spider anatomy, just as a heads up. Other than that, let's jump in. Monster Hunter Wilds released yesterday at the time of me writing this script, and I am having a hard time doing anything but play the absolute bejeebus out of that game. In fact, I will endeavor to keep this video relatively short despite its importance, so I can simply go back to stabbing some monsters and making them into pants. Accessibility has become a hot button topic in the gaming world. A lot of people, myself included, argue for it because the purpose of video games is enjoyment and leisure. Games are made to have fun with, and if people are frankly unable to enjoy a game, then it only makes sense to add in settings so that they are able to enjoy it. There are several counter arguments against accessibility options, and I will briefly address those towards the end of the video. The major point of this video is not necessarily to argue for accessibility in video games, but to give feedback to Capcom about a particular accessibility mode that they have included in Monster Hunter Wilds. Arachnophobia modes have been getting more and more popular, and as someone with arachnophobia, I cannot stress how happy I am to see that. I have struggled my entire life with severe arachnophobia and subsequently bullying that stems from people not understanding it. Arachnophobia is classified as a specific phobic disorder, and it is believed that up to 6% of the world's population has some level of arachnophobia. This has been one of the leading reasons that arachnophobia modes have been included in games, despite some people insisting it's all woke nonsense, whatever that means. I wish I could describe what it's like to have arachnophobia. Logically, I cannot defend it because it is so irrational. I understand that logically spiders have their place in the world and that they're generally harmless. However, all of that logic goes out the window as soon as I see one. I tend to feel really nauseous, my body freezes up, I start shaking, it feels really hard to breathe. I've had moments where I feel just like super cold, and usually for hours after I see the spider, I have this sensation across my skin where it feels like there's just a million little things crawling all over me. It's caused me to throw up before. I've had severe anxiety attacks from it as well, to the point where I've gone nonverbal and have just cried for hours. It's really rough, and it's a very draining disorder to deal with. I don't often talk about how bad it affects me because it's something that, again, I've experienced a lot of harassment and bullying over, but I feel like it's something that also needs to be talked about more because a lot of people don't understand it. Again, it is something irrational. Someone who doesn't have it probably won't really understand what it's like, so I'm doing my best to describe how it makes me feel. Basically, it's an extreme level of just absolute terror and waves upon waves of anxiety that last for even hours after. Video games often have spider enemies, particularly fantasy RPGs, which are some of my favorite games. While I've learned over the years that some spiders will trigger me while others won't, I've had to learn to adapt. Mods have genuinely carried me through some games like Dragon Age, Skyrim, and even Elden Ring: Shadow of the Erdtree. Prior to me switching to PC gaming and mods being more console-friendly for certain franchises, I had to do things like fight with my eyes closed, or hand the controller to someone else, or even turn the camera so I could not see the enemy. Monster Hunter Wilds recently released, like I said, and I am a big fan of the series. I had that game pre-ordered and sitting in my Steam library basically the moment I could pre-order the game. A lot of my friends know about my phobic disorder, and they're all super sweet and they accommodate me. When the first trailer with the spider enemy Lalabarina came out, they let me know, and I was filled with this sense of dread. Wilds has a grittier, more realistic feeling than Rise, and I just knew I was gonna be in for a rough time. And then Capcom announced that they would have an Arachnophobia mode, and for a few minutes, I was thrilled, until I learned it was only for the small endemic life in the environment maps. I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. I do think having the Arachnophobia mode causing small endemic spider-like life to get turned into slimes is a good decision. But as someone with arachnophobia, I am disappointed that by the time of the game's release, Capcom decided to not have this mode apply to the large spider boss enemies. While I have not heard the argument for why this is, I can only assume that it was due to not being able to come up with a way to make the monster's attacks telegraphable while also being censored for people with arachnophobia. However, I have to say, not also censoring these bosses makes the current arachnophobia mode feel not very useful. While censoring these smaller insects is certainly beneficial for those who need it, I feel as though most people who are going to be made uncomfortable around the smaller spider enemies will also probably be uncomfortable in fights with Lalabarina or Nerscylla. The fact that Capcom added this mode to begin with suggests that they understand the importance of it, but as the mode is right now, it is not helpful. Of course, different things trip people's phobias. Not everyone is built the same. Some people are triggered by just the thought of a spider or just by seeing a web. I can only really speak from my perspective as someone who has lived with this for over 30 years. I feel like the arachnophobia mode misses the mark by not censoring the larger enemies at the very least, and I want to offer suggestions as to how Capcom could potentially fix this issue. Here's some specific things that I think are good to target for making this mode more accessible. 1. Getting rid of the spider webs. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how feasible that is for certain boss arenas, but it would help some people that are a little more sensitive. 2. Reducing overall detail. As beautiful as I'm sure these models are, realism tends to make anxiety attacks worse. Spidery faces, particularly the mandibles and the eyes, are trigger points for a lot of people. At least from my experience and from the experience I've heard from other people. What I would suggest is something of the following. Have a mode to reduce the spider boss details. You can replace the legs with simple blobs or polygons to indicate hitboxes. My arachnophobia outweighs my need for immersion, personally, so you can make the enemy look a bit silly if it makes it accessible. You could also turn them into slimes and simply have polygons to indicate things like Lalabarina, for instance, has a stinger, things like that. You could also offer a monster swap feature and give people the ability to pick a different monster that visually shows up during the fight. It could be a limit of like 3 other monster options, and it could be a mode turned on by a party leader if the group is multiplayer. There is the potential for troll tactics with that version. I think the overall reduction of the model detail is probably just the more desired option, but I do think if that is potentially too difficult, you could just put it in a different monster and then it still drops the Nerscylla drops. I recorded this video to share my perspective on this subject, and I hope people don't take this as me dunking on Capcom. I adore Monster Hunter. I think Wilds is definitely going to be their best entry in the series yet, and I can't wait to get back to playing. Wilds is probably my personal game of the year 2025 hands down already. But as a fan, I want to give them feedback as to how they can improve this setting. I am not a game dev by any means, so I don't know if my ideas are feasible, but I hope this feedback does reach Capcom and that they reconsider how the mode currently functions. While I do believe this mode was made with good intentions, and I appreciate that they thought to include something in the first place, I think that it needs some improvement. Compare this setting versus modes for people who experience color blindness, for instance. You wouldn't have a setting for colorblindness alter only part of the game. You would have it alter the entirety of the game so the person could progress through it without any issue. I see no reason why the arachnophobia mode should be any different and only cover part of Monster Hunter Wilds, especially when, in the high rank setting, large spider monsters freely roam the environments. Some people may argue against phobia mode settings in video games, and while this video is more intended for feedback for Monster Hunter Wilds than discussing the benefits of arachnophobia modes in video games, I want to quickly shoot down the common arguments I see against it. Other than the wokeness argument, that's just ridiculous. People have said in the past that there should be no arachnophobia modes because video games sometimes have the theme of facing your fears. Exposure therapy is a proven way to deal with specific phobia disorder. That is true. However, please consider the following. Exposure therapy should be administered by a professional in a controlled setting, not a video game. This is for everyone's safety and comfort. Video games are not a replacement for actual therapy. Additionally, people should just be allowed to have fun playing a video game without any stress. When I boot up Skyrim to play it, I don't really care about facing spiders as some sort of substitute for therapy. I don't really care about the idea of facing my fears. I just want to have fun. Not everything needs to be about self-improvement. We're allowed to just have fun. I've also heard some arguments saying that if we continue to just put in accessibility options, then it ruins the original artist's vision of the game. And I'm gonna be so real. My ability to have fun and not be stressed is way more valued to me than appreciating the original artist's vision. Especially if what is causing me anxiety is maybe like a 5% part of the game, but it's still required. I can appreciate everything in the game. I just don't want to appreciate the spider part, which is probably a small portion of the game, but it's enough to be a problem for me in most cases. It's true that it would be impossible to accommodate every single phobia in a video game. I think adding safe mode sliders for common phobias is not exactly a tall order either. Most people will naturally not engage in a game that will trigger them if their trigger is the bulk of the game's content. For instance, I don't play Subnautica because I find deep water and large aquatic monsters to be very uncomfortable. But Monster Hunter Wilds has endless hours of content. The spiders are only a small percent of the game, but they maintain enough of a presence and are required to progress the story that while they're a small percentage, they're still there and they have to be dealt with in order to play the game and finish the game. If you still have doubts or questions about arachnophobia in video games, I recommend watching Laura K. Buzz's video on the subject. It's a couple years old now, but it's a really good video. I would say it's still relevant, and it's only about 10 minutes long. I understand that not everyone is going to get through this video and understand the importance of why I believe that arachnophobia modes should exist and why I think that Capcom needs to change the one for Monster Hunter Wilds. I hope that even if you don't understand it, you can at least respect the fact that this is a problem that is bothering other people and it is impairing their enjoyment of the game. I am happy that Capcom included an arachnophobia mode at all. However, if I was going to make a product and include this kind of mode, I would want to hear from the people that really benefit from it and need these kinds of modes. I would want to have feedback. And so this is me giving Capcom feedback. I really do sincerely hope that somebody from Capcom sees this or that there is enough feedback from people that are playing the game that something has changed. As we wrap up today's video, I would like to ask to please really consider at least liking, commenting, and or sharing this video so that it gains traction and maybe someone at Capcom sees it. I know that some people will think this is silly or cringe or woke, whatever the heck that means, but this is an ongoing issue for a lot of people. Games should be accessible because games are meant to be fun. If you watch this video all the way through, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I've really struggled over the years talking about my experience with arachnophobia. It's a really uncomfortable subject because, again, I've just experienced a lot of harassment. I'm sure that someone will in the comments make some sort of, mean comments, whatever. If that's what they want to do in their free time, then that's what they can do, I guess. But I think that spreading awareness and educating people is just a really important thing to do. And if I have a platform enough to do that, then I want to use it for that reason. This is something that means a lot to me. So again, thank you for watching this whole video. I hope that you're enjoying Monster Hunter if you are playing the game. I'm a dual blades and bow kind of person. I'm learning bow. I'm not super good at it, but I'm learning. I'm having a good time with the game otherwise. I did have to have some people help me with one of the enemies, unfortunately, and I don't know what's going to happen whenever I hit high rank because apparently that enemy does roam. I'm hoping that Capcom sees this or gets enough feedback from people that they consider changing how the mode works right now. Genuinely, I hope that they decide to make some sort of change with this. It would mean a lot to me and everyone else who's currently struggling with this issue. Thank you again for watching. Happy hunting if you are hunting, and I'll see you in the next video.